Welcome to the In-Betwixt and In-Between. This is Leadership Limbo, a podcast aimed at helping middle managers and their supervisors embrace the discomfort and power of leading themselves and others in the midst of it all. We blend real insight with practical tools to help you lead with self-awareness, purpose, and influence. Wherever you are on your leadership journey, good afternoon, John. It is good to see you. We're recording this on a Wednesday afternoon, unlike our normal morning time. What do you like in the afternoons mentally? I guess the viewers will be able to analyze that too, but what's your afternoons like?
It depends. I did just work out, so that helps. I like to raise the energy a little bit, so I got a little bit of that in, and so I'm feeling good today. I would say there's a lot of those afternoon lulls, and I didn't, want to give you your nickname today, Hugalicious. We're going to go with Hugalicious today.
Okay. That's
Sorry,
a good one. Yeah. Do you have a list? Do you just have like a big list in front of you?
We'll see how many I can come. This might end after this episode. We'll see.
Yeah. It's me. Our planning tab 7 is just nicknames for Josh.
No. So today feeling good, excited for the topic. We'll see how I am. I mean, it rained today. You never see that here. So
no.
In some ways that feels mysterious and almost scary because it's so rare, but had the thunder. It's kind of humid right now.
It's humid. Yeah.
I'm just like sweating sitting here. So
guess what I saw last night, and you don't have to do the X-rated version because it wasn't really X-rated, but the humidity, well, just so the viewers or listeners like, what the hell are you talking about?
X-rated humidity? I can't wait to see
X-rated humidity. No, the kids and I went to a hot spring up in the mountains of Colorado, and it was a beautiful place. It was a little hippy dippy sort of place, so some people did not wear clothing. But that's not what I was here to talk about. What I was here to talk about with the humidity is that we saw fireflies. And there's only one place, this is an interesting fact, one place in Colorado, one region of Colorado where there are fireflies. And it is the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, particularly on the western side of them, where fireflies live. Because I've lived in Colorado for almost 20 years. You've lived here over 20 years or coming up in 20 years, I think, John.
Yeah, ish 20. Yeah, 2000.
Never seen fireflies here, but they do exist.
It's funny you said that because as soon as you said, guess what I saw last night, and you said humidity, I thought lightning bugs or fireflies, and I was hey, that's kind of cool. Yeah, we're going back to the Midwest. We will certainly see them there next week when I'm there with my kids. That's really cool. They're the greatest bug.
Yeah,
fireflies
is really neat.
Bug. I see. What I thought you were going to say when you started talking about the X-rated hot springs was you were going to bring in that you brought your full Hugalicious to that hot spring scenario, but never.
I always bring my full self everywhere. But yeah, this was a really unique place. I don't remember the precise name, but it's a place that limits crowds. It's a land preserve, a land and water preserve. So it's like a trust that oversees it. And it was like a flashback to like the early 1990s. It was eminently reasonable. It was not overdone. It was a lot of older folks there just taking great care of this place. It just felt really communal. It was very unique. Lots of Colorado, for those of you who've never visited or who have, it can be very commercialized. Even in the last 20 years, a lot of big resort towns, a lot of big places that, produce wonderful, beautiful experiences for people. But one of my primary reasons for living here is that it's just naturally very beautiful. So it's really lovely to get to places that are naturally beautiful, where you don't need anything but a tent to just experience something that's really uplifting and rewarding. So that's how I'm coming into this afternoon podcast.
I love it. I am interested. I won't ask this here, but to know why this very specific spot has the conditions for firefly. I'll have to look that up.
Who knows?
Or ask you.
We'll have to communicate about that. Wink, wink, which is a little teaser here. But before John kicks us off, a reminder to download and subscribe to our podcast. If you're a new listener, thank you for joining us. If you've listened through my weird experience at a hot spring, even better. We always throw a little flavor in at the beginning of the podcast of our personal lives and experiences. But from here forward, we're going to dive into some really good stuff. So thank you for joining us. Rate us, 5-star ratings really help us to get more visibility. And we're looking forward to you joining us on this journey for season 3 as we move into episode 2. So John, tell us more. Communication was the tease. Tell us more about how we're coming back to a topic that we spent some time on in season 1.
Yeah. So we, are often like really Josh and I are coming up with things that we hear in our work with people and that pop up and we're like, oh, that's interesting. Let's dive more into that of like why that showed up in this situation. And, I was in a workshop last week and we get to a point in the workshop where it's a little bit like we've done some unpacking of who we are as a team. We build a narrative and then we get in this part of, okay, so based on this, what are we hearing are the things that we want to like really strategize around as a team? Like, how do we want to, regardless if that team is functioning pretty well or they're kind of toxic, we try to get to that point and unpack that. And this group, first thing they yelled out, communication. And it hit me and I'm like, you always hear this. It's always number one. It's always communication. And I pushed, and we'll talk about this in a minute, but I pushed them. Okay, I challenged them. What do you mean by that? What are we talking about here? And so that's just got me to, it's just prompted me to think a little bit about the role that communication plays in terms of how we suggest that as kind of feedback or where our team needs to most grow. And I think there's kind of two reasons for that. I think one is because a lot of things are communication problems. Most things probably are, right? I just read The Odyssey, finished it up last night in anticipation of the IMAX 70 millimeter film that I have tickets to here in a few weeks. And so much of this is really about mistaken identities and not understanding and clear communication and how we relate to the stranger and things like that. And
assumptions.
And so this stuff's been around for 3,000 years. Assumptions, right? This stuff's been around for 3,000 years and is clear at the heart of it. So I don't want to diminish that. There is a part of me, though, that thinks that at some level, we use communication as a default or a cliche that is easy and safe to suggest as the thing we need to work on because it's generally accepted that this is something that people need to work on. And so it's kind of this idea that it's the most overused diagnosis in organizations, and it's again not because it's wrong, but because it's vague enough that everyone can agree with it. Well, no one has to own it, right? And I'm reading that from our script here because we
say that again. I think that's such a powerful statement.
I'll read it again. So communication is probably the most overused diagnosis in organizations, not because it's wrong, as I just alluded to, but because it's vague enough that everyone can agree with it. Well, no one has to own it. Right. It even feels safe to say it to our bosses and others, like, oh, it's communication. Because I think when we say it, we feel like, well, this is such a murky and complex thing to get communication right, that by me saying it, it's not blaming you, it's just blaming how tough this is, right? And so it becomes almost this like socially acceptable complaint of communication. And I want us to get past that. I want people to unearth, well, what is it that we mean? And what is someone saying when they say that communication is our problem, right?
Yeah.
This today is, I think, a lot about what does it mean to go that step further in the same way that we are encouraging people to go further with servant leadership, when we're going further with asking people to talk about what ownership means with their teams, when we tell them to go a step further to really understand what psychological safety is what does it mean to go a step further to unpack what it really means when we say we have communication issues, right? And so if you want to hear our thoughts on communication as a tool and its importance and what good communication looks like, really encourage you to go back to season 1. We did 4 or 5 episodes on this, and they all start with the title communication within kind of the frame of communication we're talking about there. But one of the things I really want to come back to, because I think it helps to frame this, because both of these are important, is actually a formula that Josh taught us, right? Which is that communication equals transmission. So what we say, what we speak, what we write. But the bigger part is part 2 is the reception. How do I hear? How do I absorb? How do I accept? Okay, so I want to remind people of that so that we can flow with this. And so today's really is about what are we doing with this idea of communication as a problem, and how do we move past it to unpack, well, what does that actually mean? Because I think, as we'll see, and Josh and I discussed before this, we hear communication is a problem and we go to kind of trite or easy solutions that we think are going to fix it, and they're just band-aids on what are actually bigger problems. And so, Josh, give us your reflections on this topic, and I know take us into kind of the next part of this.
No, that's great. I think there's a couple of things. One, I think a few different hats to wear. If you're listening to this today as a leader, one of the hats would be, what is my responsibility to clarify, to be curious, to get this like precision down when people make this concern known? I think there's the hat too of when you use this term, communication's an issue, whether you're talking with your leadership coach or a consultant, or you're just talking to your team or your leadership team or your board. It's really critical to be precise. And we'll end this podcast with this recommendation as well. But one of the frames I would take into this is be curious. Like, you have to be really curious to get at this, because this could mean a lot of things. And so what I wanted to share for just a moment is all of the various, maybe even somewhat flippant ways that people might invoke communication as the problem, and how varied the reason for that invocation would be. So communication's a problem. What could that mean? People aren't listening to me, right? So you're talking with somebody and they're like, well, yeah, communication's a big issue on this team. It might very well just mean that people don't listen to what I have to say. And in fact, anecdotally, I would say that's probably close to the number one problem that is happening when somebody says this. Other people don't get what I'm saying. Like, I say the things, they don't get it, which goes back to this idea that transmission also requires reception. So is what you're saying actually leading to people understanding it? Some people are really difficult, right? Sometimes when somebody says communication's an issue on the team, it just means that people are a pain in the ass. And it just is a shorthand for saying people are difficult. Relationships on this team are a challenge. I don't get along with a lot of people. I get along with a couple, or I get along with a lot of people, but there's a few people who really just are problematic. Kind of decision-making, difficult, confusing, right? That can sometimes do, and communication's an issue. I don't understand why leaders make the decisions that they do. I don't understand why the direction we're moving in is the direction we're moving in. Who's deciding that? I don't understand what's being asked of me. That's a common one too. Communication's an issue. We go around in circles and circles, it's decision making. It could just be we find ourselves back at the same place again and again. That's another reason that somebody might say communication's tough. I don't feel respected. That's another thing somebody might be hinting at. I don't feel, people don't like me here. People don't treat me well here. People are often like not attentive to my needs. They don't value me. That could be a reason somebody invokes communication. Meetings are a waste of time, and I don't hear engage with topics that matter. So some people will say the meetings we have, the time we spend together as a team and common spaces are issues.
Yeah.
So just running through those, I think the goal here, I'll name two quick themes, and then John, I want your reaction. One, there's just a lot of reasons. And if you just conclude that communication's an issue and your team tells you communication's an issue and you say, yeah, it's an issue, there's a very good chance that you have no idea what anyone actually means by that. There's just a lot of reasons communication is pulled under this big umbrella. And then two, I would say that a lot of these themes, and it's a good thing to pay attention to as a manager, as a leader, if communication's being brought up, is a lot of these are very, I hate to say it this way, but kind of victim-y sort of statements. Like, totally. They're like things that others are doing to you or others are not doing that would make your life better. But I would say the majority of what I just read out loud were statements that reflect an internal frustration with others.
Yep.
And I think that's a big problem, that if you don't acknowledge a lot of the change in communication on your team, which we're about to get to some of the solutions and ways of thinking, if you don't change that way of thinking, you almost reinforce the fact that people can kind of name communication as the problem, think of themselves as the victim of poor communication, and therefore take little or no responsibility to change the culture of communication in an organization. So I'll pause on all of that. John, love to hear from what you have to say.
So the big thing is in Josh running through those, and I think we'll hear some of those pop up in some of the big buckets we're going to talk about in a minute, is as he's running through those, I think what you hear is a step further than a lot of us go. Because we hear communication and our default is to go to, okay, I got to fix the transmission problem. Like, I have to structure information to people in a different way. I have to craft a different email. I have to give a better speech at a meeting, or I have to like share everything, whatever it means, right? What Josh is actually getting at in some of these is actually when you start hearing these things like people don't listen to me, other people don't get what I'm saying, people are difficult. You're actually getting at what is the behavioral challenge that my team is facing that we have to unearth together so people are better equipped to not just transmit, but to receive information. And sometimes that, like, because the communication is actually not just, did I get information? It's, was I able to wrestle with it? Was there a chance for feedback? People say, well, people don't listen to me. well, did I actually communicate it, or did I just have it in my head to defend myself when somebody makes a decision I don't like? So it's like, how do you get really into the behavior side of this, right? And for our middle managers, who this is aimed at, who are at the bottleneck of all communication problems, right? Or even if you're an executive and you're talking about the people I lead and then the board that I serve under, I want you to ask yourself, how many times have you gotten feedback that communication from leadership is a problem, and then you turn right around and say, well, communication from those above me is a challenge, from my executives or from my board? And you're just going to see that it's easy for this always to be the thing that we default to defend ourselves, right? And defend it, versus what role do I have in this and what can we like all do together here? So, here's what we're going to, in this next part, I want to get into, it's not comprehensive. It's just some ideas that Josh and I came up with, is what might be some things that this is, when we hear communication, from our experience, what are some things that this might actually be asking us to think is actually the challenge that our team is facing, right? And to like kind of work through that and talk about why people say communication, but actually mean this. Right. And it's not to say that it's always these things. We hope that you use this to think about for yourself. What are some other things when people say communication, they're actually saying is the challenge they're facing? Okay. So we're going to go from there. And I think, Josh, we put this one at the top and we had it at the bottom, and we both said, no, this one should probably go first. So I'm going to let you take it away on this one that you added there.
Yeah, it's actually a really nice extension of what you just kind of wrapped there with, John, which is the idea of self-awareness and maturity. I think this is probably, to be very clear, this is probably what people are both asking for, but they have no idea this is what they're asking for. So I'll kind of name the caveat here, is that this is not likely the conclusion that most consultants, coaches, leaders get to, because it is so broad in some ways, but it's also maybe the most powerful foundation for healthy teams, which is self-awareness of the members of that team and maturity, the ability to operate with clarity under pressure. And so on some level, we're just going to name this kind of big picture. We've spent a lot of time in previous podcasts. We'll continue to dive into this in future episodes, around the importance of people taking responsibility for their part. And that's kind of what you just shared there, John, is the importance of ownership, that everyone who is looking at communication as a challenge on the team, what they really could be asking for is that everyone has a responsibility to own their part. Yeah. And that part might be, I don't share what I think I need to share, but I still sit here and complain about that. Or I share all of the time and I don't get the reception I need, yet I'm continuing to share my concerns in the same exact way, not adjusting my model of what it means to transmit and also design my transmission so someone else can hear it, right? Everyone has to take a role in fixing communication on a team. And so part one, or concept number one here, is what are people actually asking for? I would argue, I believe, John, you would make the same argument, that really long-term, what you're hoping for in a team is that people can speak for their own part, speak with maturity, speak for their responsibility towards the challenge, as opposed to kind of coming into this concern with someone else's problem sort of mentality.
And if you're a manager, you're like, yeah, that'd be great. I wish everyone would just like build some self-awareness. Well, no, that's your job. Your job is not just to, get the perfect weekly email out or to do the perfect thing at a meeting. Part of it is actually to develop the behaviors in others that they see their responsibility in this. And that includes you, right? Of how aware am I about how I'm listening? Where am I mature in terms of like knowing what the limitations are and how people can communicate and what my role is in receiving that and then acting based on what's communicated to me? Where's my role in making some autonomous decisions and having agency, but also doing it in alignment with the team? So just to that point, it's not just a magical, your team should be able to do it because you just tell them like, hey, I need everyone to show more self-awareness. There is a development aspect to this that's worth thinking about and challenge.
I don't want to go too far down this, but I actually think this is so worth making a very explicit example. Okay, I love what you just said, is you're the middle manager. I don't know if we're going to live role play this, but let's pretend here, John, you're my manager. I come to you with, hey, John, communication is just really jacked up on the team and it's really preventing me from bringing my best self to work here. I'm just really curious, what are you going to do about that?
Yeah, no, I number one, appreciate you sharing this with me. I think it takes a lot to admit when there's faults on the team and so on. I'm really curious to get a little bit more into the weeds with you about what that means, because communication is a big bucket. There's a lot to how we communicate. And so I'd love to hear, when you say communication is a challenge, what specifically does that mean? Like where is the biggest challenge? Where's the starting point, would you say?
Right. So, I mean, that just as a quick example, do not just go into solve.
Yeah.
Ask a lot of questions is the point here. And especially as a manager, you're going to be the one who hears it before your executive team does. So just asking questions, making sure that if that dialogue were to continue, at some point, I think the second question to get to as the coach or the mentor, the supervisor would be, what's your part of this? Like, what is your responsibility in this? And that's one of the things that I reflect back on a lot of years in leadership. I rarely asked that question. I thought my servant leadership was absorb, absorb, absorb. So if somebody on the team said, hey, communication's jacked up, the memo sucks, people are not following through with this, I'd say, wow, thanks for sharing that. We really can work on this. And the problem was, they said, well, what's your part in not reading the memo? Like, what's the issue there? I don't understand. Right. And like, oh, well, I'm supposed to read it. I'm so busy. Okay, well, like, I understand that. But what's your part in not solving this communication issue? Like, be more curious than just absorption. So anyways, I don't want to get caught on that tangent. I don't think it's a tangent. I think it's really essential. But I want us to keep moving here. So John, what's this next category?
Yeah. So to reiterate, number one was really about what is the role of self-awareness and maturity when your team is talking about communication. I'm going to bucket the next two together, but it could be an issue around how people understand their role, the clarity of their role or roles within the team. And then that funnels into decision rights. So I'm going to start with role clarity. Often what people are asking for is, are we structured in a way that we know where my responsibility starts, where it ends, and where the next person starts, right? And not that means to create organizations where people don't have flexibility and they aren't willing to lean in. But that is a number one way of helping your team to understand how things work around here. And to start from a frame, like when you started that, then communication's clearer. Because when we communicate things, people know who they're communicating it to. They know, based on the way that I think about my role, I understand how this communication impacts me. When people are confused in their role and they get communication, there's a lot of questions like, does that apply to me? Well, how am I supposed to make that a reality in what I'm doing, right? And so role clarity is a very fundamental thing that sometimes when people say communication's wrong, if I'm a leader, I'm asking, I wonder if people actually fully know whether big picture, their roles and responsibility, or within the context of this specific thing, understand where they fit into this. Because that might be the first problem, right? So our expectations actually clear. Are there those overlapping responsibilities, or are there gaps? And then, a lot of times the communication issues are really organizational design issues. That takes me into what I actually think often is the case, which is decision rights. Too many times people, like, decision rights are just like, oh, that's the main boss's job. And so we kind of stop there. There should be a lot more intentionality for how you designate and help people to understand the role and importance of decision making, that you can actually train and develop your teams on and help them to understand. Because there's a lot of times you should be actually determining who is the decision maker in this situation. I would argue this is something that should come up on a weekly or a monthly basis, where you as maybe the head leader are delegating decision rights, not just delegating tasks, but delegating decision rights. Because what happens when people get confused is they're upset either that they don't feel like they ever get to make a decision, or they don't understand who makes the decisions or how decisions are made. And so those are just, I think those two are big ones, because it's not just about communication. It's about the structure of our org. It's the structure of how we function and how we align in it. And when people are confused on that, then they just default to like, nobody understands anything. Right. So
I think, two really important categories. I will draw particular attention to founders. If you're a founder of a business, the founder of a school, the founding leader, these two categories become very difficult, especially if you've undergone a certain level of growth, where you had your team of 6 or your team of 4, your team of 10, now you're a team of 15, 20, 25. You being able to get out of the way of your own decision right blind spots is going to probably determine the fate of your company. And I don't want to be dramatic, but frankly, it's hard for me to find evidence of founders who couldn't get out of their own way, truly delegate decision making to others, and still find a way for that company, that business, that school to grow exponentially. It just doesn't happen, because I think a real bottleneck is not just the idea that, oh, I've assigned some decision making to others. I think a real signal would be, how often are people coming to you for consultation? And as a helper, I love people to come for me as a consult. Oh, I love to hear how you're thinking about this decision. Not saying, no, don't do that. But what I ought to have done in the past more than I did would have been to say, I'm really curious, why are you coming to me at all? Oh, well, I thought you might want to hear what I'm about to do. This is your responsibility to make the kind of decision we've talked about. What is it that you don't have right now that you need from me? Oh, well, I thought the truth, if the truth really came out, it wasn't that they weren't confident in their own ability to make decisions. It was that I was so inviting of partnership, consultation, secret decision-making influence that people wouldn't get out of my way, and they would continue to come to me. And so I carried too much of an influence over certain other people's ability to grow. And if you're a founder, or even if you're not a founder, it doesn't really matter. If you're somebody who has been part of decision making for a long time in your organization and you've theoretically delegated, don't just ask, did I delegate it? Ask, how often are people coming to me to run ideas past me? Because if the answer is a lot or more than you want, that's a you problem. And that's something that really requires you to step back and examine why people continue to come to you. And the only way to examine why they are is to ask them.
Yeah, no, totally. Do you want to get into, do you want me to introduce these and you go for it, or do you want to do this next one?
Yeah, I'll throw this one in here. Yeah. Psychological safety, vulnerabilities, another reason that people say communication's broken down. We've already done a full episode on this. I think a great signal here is kind of what I was just saying, honestly, is how often are people actually going to come to the leader before they make a decision? That could be a signal that you have either created too much ruinous empathy or that you're always there to support. It could also be that people don't feel safe, that if they made the decision, you wouldn't come back and say, whoa, hold on. When did you decide this? Why did you decide this? What actually happened here? This is not an acceptable outcome. So there's a lot to do with the safety of people being able to make decisions on their own, which, going back to the very first point we made, if you want everyone to be able to take responsibility for their own part, you have to be able to maintain, you as a manager, as a supervisor, as a leader, you have to be able to maintain the appropriate emotional distance from somebody making a decision that does not go the way you want it to go. Yeah. And so creating the conditions for safety, not just comfort, but safety in your organization is one of the other critical asks that somebody who says communication's a problem might actually be asking for.
This is probably going to fit into the next two. So I feel like I'm going to have some overlap, but I'm going to go for it here. There is a part of this too that is, when people say communication's a problem, I often wonder, is the issue actually that people are unwilling, they don't want to admit what they don't understand? So maybe they heard it, they get it, but they don't actually know what the thing means that you communicated to them. Or even they're worried that they can't do it, or whatever it is, right? Or they feel like they get the decision, but they don't understand everything they need to get it. And so there's that vulnerability piece that you have to develop in people, that they, yes, can make decisions, like you said, that they're going to be able to put it out there when they think something's bad or wrong, and not be condemned for that, as we talked about in our whole episode on psychological safety. But I also think sometimes it's just like people, they use it wasn't communicated well, to actually make an excuse for just, I didn't get it. Like, I just didn't get it. And that takes me, that's going to fit in the next one, the next two, which I thought about bucketing together, but kept them a little separate.
I actually one thought, John, on the safety piece. I'm thinking of a scenario in which somebody can articulate the framework of, I don't feel safe here. As a manager, like, some people don't express it, and you're kind of trying to pull this out of them. But if somebody says, well, I just didn't feel comfortable saying this thing, I didn't feel safe. I think two things can be true in that moment. One could be, don't assume anything. So ask questions. What about sharing this would have left you feeling unsafe? Ask more questions. Ask a lot of questions. Because if you're, and then the second piece is, your reaction will matter in that moment. Because maybe the reason they don't feel comfortable is that you have been too dismissive. You've been too quick to assume, or you haven't asked the questions in the past. So treat that as a really critical moment, but don't also collapse and say, oh my God, I'm so sorry. You don't feel comfortable here. And like, safety is so important to us. I really just want to know how we can do better. Like, again, it's going to depend on who you are and your own awareness, but somebody might actually say they don't feel safe. I would just pin this to the top of your list. If somebody says that or they don't feel comfortable, ask questions, don't make assumptions. Don't take it personally. Like, there's nothing, this is an opening for a conversation that you have to have.
But this is another one of those spots, to your point, where it doesn't just end at where it ends with a lot of people is like, oh, if we just create the systems or the transmission properties to get information out, then people will have what they need. This is actually one of those things of know that there's a behavioral element here that people don't feel safe communicating. So the issue is not communication, it's how I feel communicating. I don't,
Right.
I just say it's kind of one and the same, right? But there's just like there's more to it. And so, yeah, you're right. It could be I'm over accommodating for people and I need to teach them how to not like to know that actually it is safe to communicate. You're just you're kind of like using that as an excuse. But in some cases, it's truly not okay to communicate.
Yeah.
They get dismissed or they get condemned or they get whatever. So that's,
Yeah. Even as an example, I would have heard that 5 years ago. I said, well, we need to hit our norms. Let's go back to our meeting norms. I'll really just lay into the team about how important it is to make sure everyone feels safe. That's one of our norms and our values.
Yep.
That would have been like a very traditional answer I think I and some other leaders would have provided but I had no idea who the problem was with. It might not have been the team that was the issue. It was literally one person who this individual had an issue with.
Yeah.
But again, going to a system to solve this concern of safety, going back to ask more questions. I think if you're going to hear one thing from me today, it's going to be that statement. So,
yeah, we're going to come back to systems.
Let's do it.
Because not yet, but these next two go together, but I'm going to keep them a little separate. Is there a challenge with the learning mindset on our team or the growth mindset on our team? And they sound, there's the balloons. So anybody who's watching on YouTube, I just made balloons pop up by accident. But I like that there's a distinction and I encourage our team to think about that. So a couple questions to ask under a learning mindset is, do people on my team, do those I manage, do they take responsibility for understanding? And not just because I tell them to, but because I've trained them to do it and we've developed people to do that. We need to know that great communicators don't just simply explain well. It's that great teammates actively work to understand. So how do we get it so that people are learners and taking responsibility for understanding? Because that's a part, and this is the part that I think a lot of managers will be like, finally, somebody's saying it. The issue is like people aren't taking responsibility for understanding, right? But if we don't help people to understand that and to know that and to develop into that, then that's a challenge. Then there's the growth mindset, which is, do people assume that confusion is temporary? Do they believe that part of a natural process of being a part of a team and being in human systems is that confusion and complexity will exist and that's okay and we can work through that? I think sometimes what people are looking for is perfect communication and there's never a lack of clarity or there's very little complexity. This goes back to what we, I think, talked about, in our episode last week around servant leadership is, it's your job to take suffering away from me. A growth mindset, if I've developed that in people, then actually they are going to be developed and trained in dealing with complexity, in challenge, and are going to know that that's temporary as long as I'm willing to work on it. Whoever I am, individual contributor, manager, right? Mm-hmm. And so, if they conclude like they never tell us anything, that might just be their way of saying that I don't want to deal with confusion ever. Okay. So I don't know. So to me, you might ask the question, do I need to develop the learner and the growth mindset of my team and maybe even in myself? And that's actually the challenge of communication here.
Yeah. It's an interesting nuance between the two. What's coming up for me is a phrase that one of my mentors, colleagues, John Ingalls, a different John, had shared, but he said, Josh, one of the things that I hear most often from leaders who never do anything about their own development is, I believe everyone can grow. I believe everyone has the ability to learn and grow. He's like, I hear that more often from people who never do anything about it.
Well, yeah.
And so that's a little bit of like, oh, I have this belief, this idea in the growth mindset, but do I actually have a learner mindset? Do I actually do the work to make this ethereal concept of growth happen? So it's actually kind of interesting to see it. Now, I think if you were to argue like the new growth mindset would imply you're going to do something about it, but I actually like distinguishing these two things.
Yeah.
Because it could be the ability to, if you have a growth mindset, you could easily kind of pass the buck to everyone else needing to grow. Oh yeah, our team has to grow. I believe we can get better.
Well, can I push
But then if you have a learner's mindset, do you actually take a part in doing the thing to make the team better?
But I want to push on, I'm going to push on what, so in this context, in the way this is framed, is growth mindset is the assumption that things will be challenging, that I will struggle and that we will struggle, and yet we can work through that because it's temporary.
Mm-hmm.
A learner mindset is like, am I working to understand things, to know things, to ask questions? So that's kind of more of a knowledge formation, where the other is like the one is like a knowledge gathering orientation. I see the other as a challenge orientation, like how willing am I to work through challenge,
to do the work. Okay,
I guess I heard you talking about how these two are different. I think they're different. Or I'm sorry, how they, like, one's better than the other, I guess is what I heard. I just think about different. I think one's more about my orientation towards challenge, and the other's my orientation towards willing to learn things and get knowledge.
I see, yeah. And I would actually agree with what you're saying too. This is the first time I've seen this distinction, so I'm kind of live thinking it out loud with you and the listeners. But yeah, I do see, I see them not as like better or not. I think you need both, right?
Yeah,
what I'm saying, if you believe you can grow, great. That is an important first belief. But then the second part is the learning mindset, which is what are you going to do that? What is your part in making that growth happen? And so I see them as an interesting kind of complementary way of talking about growth and learning. So cool stuff. Good.
And I think to the point of what we go, and before we get into the last one here, is all of this is saying is, again, these might be things that when you actually hear the challenge of communication, you actually realize like, oh, actually what's happening here is my team, because I haven't developed them or I've enabled them, has a hard time overcoming complexity, or my team doesn't know how to go about learning these things and kind of building agency in learning them, and I need to help develop that, right? Okay. Last one here. We put it last for a reason. And Josh, tell us why we put systems, and maybe it is a systems problem. The last one. Why do you think, why did we decide to put this one last or keep it last?
Yeah. I don't know if I'll answer what you think I'm going to say, but I do think that one of the, and this is again revealing a little bit of my tendencies in my own leadership journey, is I love to go to systems. You read my website, systems and people is like the people IQ equation, the peak equation. Systems are critical. I believe they're critical, but you can definitely, and I'll throw this word back out. My brother's like, what the hell does over-index mean? But basically over rely upon. You can easily like outsource the discomfort, the lack of desire to engage in risky communication directly with another person, have these difficult conversations by pushing it to a system, by operationalizing all of your protocols, by basically making things feel so safe, so standardized, so protocoled that you don't have to, like, oh, well, if we just had all of these protocols, we would never have these issues, right? And have you probably heard a manager say that, a leader say that, like, I don't understand how this could have happened. Like, it's very clear that we have a protocol for this. Like, this is just not how we do things. And you're probably like, yeah, of course, but this is what just happened. I think the reason that systems might be showing up last year is that you need them, absolutely, but you can absolutely go to them too quickly to solve for a problem that will simply not be solved alone by a system.
Yeah. I assume,
is that the right answer?
I assume that is the answer.
Okay, great. Good.
We didn't lead with it because then that seems like, oh, first fix your systems. That's what people often, if communication is the default, easy, cliche challenge to say is the team's problem because it's naming something that sounds real, but nobody has to take real responsibility for it. The cliche response to that is, great, let's fix a system, right? And so, let's start with, if you do get to like, oh, actually we have a systems problem in terms of how communication functionally happens, you might ask some of these questions. Are the right meetings happening? Is information stored where people expect it to be and shared in the right way? Are there repeatable processes that people know are going to happen so they can get that information? And then, when we have bad systems, it actually creates communication work that we have to do to get the things that we need. So those are good questions. The problem is that's where people go to immediately. They start thinking about, well, if we had a meeting here, honestly, often the answer when you get to a systems level is, oh, we can actually reduce the meetings and be more intentional about what's happening in the EVs that fit in with like the communication needs, right? And so, yeah, to that point, it's a real thing. But if you're a leader and your first thought is, oh, we must need to change how people get information, I question whether or not you've done a deep enough dive into some of the behavioral elements, the shared ownership, the learning that has to happen, how we deal with complexity, how we deal with challenge, how we deal with conflict. Because often communication is used to code those kind of more toxic issues than it is to say, I wish the weekly memo was better. It's they say that because they don't want to, either people don't know what the problem is, or they're afraid to truly say what it is in thoughts that they might make their manager feel bad, or that their manager might take it the wrong way, right? So we're going to keep systems here because it certainly can be the underlying issue that your team is dealing with. But if you jump to that immediately, I would just have you take a 5-minute pause to ask, but what else could this be?
I love it. This is a not so subtle pitch to operations leaders, COOs, directors of ops. You do incredibly critical work. As former school leaders, John and I both did a lot of operations work, but ops leaders absolutely need to be incorporating critical questions about the other sides of communication that will not be addressed simply because you have this operating process or system.
Yep.
There's just like anecdotally, company that I do some work with called Black Canyon, they use EOS, the entrepreneurial operating system. I know a lot of small, medium-sized businesses do that. They have an implementer. Sounds like that's a fantastic person or team of people helping them with their systems. They also chose to bring in outside coaches to help the leaders who are doing EOS be able to do the other stuff around communication challenges. And so it's a really beautiful example of a systems operationally focused model is not sufficient by itself. Right. And I think a lot of businesses, a lot of organizations will index towards systems and processes. Almost no business doesn't have an ops person. You need them, absolutely. But do those ops leaders or do the leaders who work with that operations person push for these other questions around communications? There's a good chance the answer is no. You could definitely make yourself a more robust and impactful operations leader if you start to think of questions beyond just, do we have a process? Is it in a handbook? Is it clear, and articulated? That's critical, but both are critical.
Yeah, great stuff. So Josh, I'd love you, because you wrote it down. I think you've mentioned a few times, so I'm going to let you do it, but it's somewhat of our homework, but more of like a way of thinking. So give our folks like how we want them to maybe use what they've learned here, or how they can do a similar exercise to what we've done here today.
Yeah. Ask more questions. And here's the nuance, and it's a reflection for myself. Ask more questions you don't want the answers to.
Yeah.
Don't just ask questions based off of your operating hypothesis. That is so difficult to do as a leader. It's hard because it means you actually have to be open to thinking about what you're looking at differently. If your presupposition coming into a set of questions was, well, I already believe that the system's broken. So you ask 5 questions like, well, what's wrong with our meetings? What's wrong with the agenda? What is wrong with the cadence of our meetings? What is wrong with the frequency of our meetings? You haven't been curious enough to actually get answers that would tell you something different.
Yeah.
So when I say ask questions, ask more general, like, what do you mean? I don't get what you're saying. Like, I want to understand it. Don't even define under any sort of paradigm what you're trying to get at. Just be openly curious. I actually think I can do way better at that. I think if every leader did a little bit more of that, you would get a lot of answers to these communication challenges.
Yeah. If your questions that you ask in terms of the why don't get to some sort of like behavioral or mindset issue with you or your team, then you probably haven't dug deep enough. And if your strategies that you decide to put in place or the solutions you come up with are just systems, but they aren't layered with like, what is the mindset piece or the behavioral component that this is meant to like aim at fixing, which is beyond this conversation. I think that's a general thought. then you haven't thought deeply enough about it, I would argue. Like, systems are important. I said this to a team last week. Once we get here and we put these strategies in place, the question isn't, can we execute the system? It's what behavior or what mindset is it fixing for our team so that the system is helping to change that mindset or change that behavior, right? So I love that. That's the thing. To Josh's point, it's ask questions, go layers deep, but get to, okay, what's the thing I don't want to hear? And I'm going to go there as quickly as possible. Like, I want to get to the most vulnerable, scary thing it could be. And once I'm there, I might find it's not that bad, but I'm willing to work out of it. So great conversation. Thank you all for listening, for being part of this. Hopefully you took something away from this. And if nothing else, it's getting you to challenge yourself in the way that you think about that. So until next time, this has been Leadership Limbo, where we make space for the tension and tools for the journey. See you in the in-between.